Hi, I'm Grace Lynch. Welcome to another chapter of the Wilderness Chronicles. I'm going to flesh out the bits about the language box perspective because the accidental discovery of the experience and the method is pretty foundational to all the future methods, at least the template of it, so to speak. So I'll say quickly in this one, I'll just lay out the different bits about the whole procedure, where it came from, what it means to me, and how it process it, because it's going to be how I'll use it later. Where it came from. So when I fell in 1987 and lost language, it became profoundly synesthetic. Doctors told me it's cross-modal, so that my brain adapted to not having any way to build scaffolding by connecting pretty much everything with everything else in a sensory way. So when I found language and was building my way back, there were ways of knowing that I could not explain how I could do. And when I talk about them in everyday life, they sounded, even to me, a little bit crazy. Like I would just know things instantly. I'd understand something instantly. And that felt crazy to me, and it wasn't how I had been. I mean, I had been fairly quick before I fell. At 22, I was a sophomore in college and a math major, and by then I had already. I took the AP calculus class in high school and aced it with a 5, and by my sophomore year, I had taken all 3 courses in calculus. I'd also taken differential equations, abstract algebra, and my first real analysis course. I think that's all of it. I think I took a problem-solving course and got invited to be on my team for Rockport to take the Putnam exam, which is a big muggy thing in the math world. So I didn't do very well because Putnam's really hard. But so after I fell, though, I thought that my way was crazy. I didn't process the way that I had been raised to process and educated to process, and thought of myself all of my life. And that, together with this disturbing sense that when I thought about my friends and everything familiar, in terms of my visceral, emotional, psychological connection, it was fine. It was just as it had always been. But when I tried to figure out how to apply words as they had been to everything looked like a movie set, and it was so frightening because I wasn't sure whether what I was identifying was real or not, because deciding what's real or not involves assigning symbolic meaning to an experience, which is the part that was shattered. In those first months and years, I didn't have the apparatus to know whether I was alive or not, or real or not, or sane or not, or me or not, because all of those are deciding things that my brain wasn't capable of doing. I'd lost the apparatus, and there was without the apparatus to decide I'd lost the apparatus and no one else to help me, I was just in that place. And I called it the bad place because it was an agony unlike anything I've ever felt before or since. There's nothing as bad as that. I've never encountered anybody who could do something evil enough or frightening enough in movie or in life to remotely touch how terrifying that experience is, to be a living awareness with no anchor or grounding and have life just continue. So as words came back, I began to sort of remember by muscle memory how to put words to things, how they sort of fit before. And everything about how I was putting words back to my experience told me that I had gone crazy. So I tried everything to sort of come back to social human reality, and I thought if I become straight, and so I become religious and I joined a church and became profoundly religious, and I'd read the Bible all my life because I am a person of faith, and I decided I'm going to become straight. I'm going to date a nice woman. I did fall in love with her after a sort, but I wasn't straight. We got married, and we had kids. I tried to build a regular life, but my brain didn't work. I couldn't work. I couldn't be part of things. I was still struggling in language and meaning. And I soon went into psychiatric care. Um, I self-reported being crazy. And of course, the weird part about it is that the chain of my consciousness seemed crazy on every level, but my ability to conceptualize in mathematics went off the charts. It became much easier for me to do things like number theory and complex analysis. After my brain injury with aphasia, when I largely couldn't read, I was learning by memorizing everything that the professor said. I'd memorize all the problems. And expressive aphasia largely resolved. I regained quickly the power to speak and soon after the power to write. I'm sorry, that's the expressive aphasia. The receptive aphasia started to resolve some. I could hear language and understand it. I never could really read very well again. So I mainly get by sort of functionally being illiterate by memorizing everything and never wanting to get caught not being able to read very much. I think I've got 3 bachelor's degrees, and in the last 40 years, I think I've probably read less, maybe a little bit more than 10 books in my 40 years since falling. Maybe closer to 20 books, but that's the entire span. Everything else I've been doing by skimming and memorizing as much as I can, asking questions, inferring, and pretending, because it's been embarrassing to not be able to read. So after that, I had taken I think 4 or 5 math courses before I fell. I took 15 of my math courses after I fell, including mostly upper division and several graduate level that I was allowed to take. As the only undergraduate, I was allowed to take them independent study. Point set topology, I did things in set theory. I loved axiomatic theory. As I said, number theory, history and math, abstract algebra, college algebra, 2 courses in probability statistics. There were 2 courses in, second course in real analysis, 2 courses in functional analysis, 2 courses in complex analysis, and I just ate it up. And so the weird part was that my consciousness in everyday life led me to think that I had gone crazy. But the ways that I processed that caused me to believe I was crazy were very amenable to higher mathematics. And I was a pretty good writer as well, because I started studying poetry at that time as well and writing, being a double major. So I went into mental health care and treatment. And because it seemed that coincidences were how I learned things, I started referring to things that as if like coincidences were teaching me. Like I would just know things. Something would just come together in a flash. And of course, like when you present at a psychiatrist's office and say, well, I was watching a street sign and it told me this, or I was watching a commercial, it told me that, or I was reading this or I saw something and it just spoke to me. That's a short bus to Crazyville. And it was not long before I found myself on a cocktail of massive doses of lots and lots of medications and kept on that for many years because I was diagnosed as, they tried many different diagnoses, but I was considered to have a thought disorder because of how I processed, and a mood disorder because I was always sad. It makes sense now that I was sad because I had lost all of what my consciousness had been. I lost my entire path to life, and I did not know why, and there was no way back, and there was no one to help me understand what had happened or why. So yeah, I was having a very long bad day for about 31 years. So they did that for 16 years. I was hospitalized for at least a week every year. I was relentlessly kept. I was putting weekly, endless psychotherapy. I was in work programs, day treatment programs, partial hospitalization programs. I've been in grief therapy, anger therapy, anxiety therapy, various interactional groups, insight-oriented therapy, depression groups, gender counseling, assertiveness training, Recovery Incorporated, and all the while being kept on a heavy dose of an antipsychotic, at least one antipsychotic, whatever antidepressant flavor of the day there was, often an anxiolytic, and also a mood stabilizer, which usually involved blood work. None of them, and it never really did anything, never changed anything. It kept me in a kind of medicated oblivion. Near the end, they ran several rounds of electricity through my skull. I was hoping that it would burn the defective part of my brain out and replace it with something. And in the aftermath, I would build a new personality that actually worked. By the time we were done in 2010, for several years I had been on antidepressants. They changed in and out. A very high dose of clozaril, a high dose of stelazine, a mild dose of Abilify, and occasional PRNs of Klonopin. I don't think I was currently on the lithium then, but I had gotten sober, and one day I realized that I had been living in this oblivion. I was almost 300 pounds at a frame that's under 6 feet tall. I slept 12 to 14 hours a day. I hadn't had sex in 15 years. And I had watched my kids come over every other weekend on visitation and watched them grow up while we watched movies. I sat in a chair and I had a bookcase about like these, 5 shelves with about 180 movies on VHS tapes. And that was my life. I got up out of bed, I sat in my chair and I watched movies in the VHS. And I went into the psychiatrist's office and I said, does it have to be like this? We're not helping me. And the psychiatrist agreed, to my astonishment. And so we made a plan. He decided to take me off of the medications. And from 2010 to 2011 was a slow weaning process. It fucked up my sleep and a bunch of other things. But my life started to come back to me. And I wanted to start eating right. I started taking walks out of my complex and maybe jogging a little bit. I started to become interested in fitness. I wanted to get laid. And so the mental health model didn't fit anymore. So I was confused because I still felt like I was somehow crazy inside. But the only two sort of functional language things that I knew how to relate to the world in terms of insanity was in terms of mental health, which was no longer available, and 12-step treatment, which I had experience with, a few different 12-step programs. So I wondered, whatever this crazy was, how am I going to fix it? And I researched online different 12-step programs. And I'd had some experience in not identifying with any fellowship. I'm just telling you the experiences in rooms I've sat in. AA, NA, GA, SLAA, CODA, and worked the steps and stuff like that. I really worked hard. And I looked online to see which one would be best for this form of crazy. And all of them had a similar problem. You had to be able to name the crazy in order to know what you're powerless over to decide what your program was. And I did not know at that time that I had aphasia and autism and synesthesia and TBI and PTSD. So I couldn't name the crazy. Logically, I couldn't begin. And so then it was wondering, well, I don't know how to use the word insanity effectively enough to find a program. And what led to exploring what became the Language Box perspective was having this thought. Maybe it was something about the way I had come to understand what sanity and insanity were over the course of my life that caused me to think about it incorrectly or use it incorrectly, so I don't know how to apply it. If I go back and I study experiences where I learned what it meant, maybe I'll find out what I misunderstood and fix it, and then I'll know how to build my life. It was that simple question. Maybe I misunderstood sanity and insanity that led me to build the beginnings of the Language Box perspective. And that simple thing, maybe my understanding is what's wrong, is what led to everything else that followed. So that's going to be it for this video because I'm going to keep it really small, and we'll proceed from here. See you next time.